You've got to get up pretty early in the morning to speak to America's hardworking farmers and food producers. We should know. FLM Harvest is a strategic, full-service creative consultancy proud to reach more farmers, farmer boards, and food and commodity associations than any agency in the country. And we understand omni-channel as well as we understand the journey from field to fork. Most importantly, we connect clients to the audiences that matter to them.
Thank you for joining us today on Agri-Pulse TV for the Meet the Farm Hands video segment. My name is Hannah Pagel, and today we are joined by President and CEO of the U.S. Grain Council, Tom Sleight. Tom, thanks for joining us today.
Hannah, thanks for having me on. It's great to be here.
Well, so why don't we start out by just getting the timeline of your career from when it started to up to present day?
Well, it's a long time. Well, I always like to say my career in agriculture started on the farm. Back when I was first able to help on our family's dairy farm in New York. We were an 8th generation farm family there. It was really, one of the best times of my life when I look back on things. But so started there, started on the farm, but I was actually in a farm area of the country where agriculture really wasn't flourishing. I was, not too far in the suburbs, upper suburbs of New York City. Suburban encroachment was coming farther and farther north, and my father always sort of told me that a career in farming in our county, looking to the future, was probably something may not be big in my future. So he'd encouraged me to look at a lot of different things, and I did. And so went to school, got out of school, worked on the farm a little bit more with my father, but then I went into decided to go out where agriculture was king, and I was out to the Midwest. I started working in the grain business in North Dakota. That moved on to working more another step along the way into Montana. That eventually brought me back here to Washington, D.C., where I started with the Grains Council back in 1983, long time ago. So I worked the council here for a couple of years, served overseas, came back to the council in Washington office, then actually left the council for a period of about 10 years, continued working in agriculture both in the state of Virginia, but also went back to my home state of New York. And then the call came back around 2010 to see if I wanted to come back to the council. And I did, came back as vice president then. 2012, I was elevated to CEO, and that's it in a nutshell.
Here we are today.
Yeah, that's right.
Awesome. I kind of want to go back to the 1980s and just talk about your time during when you first started your career. You said 1983.
Yeah.
So maybe can you give your perspective, since you were just starting your career, around that time in agriculture was the 1980 farm crisis. What was your perspective of what agriculture was like then compared to now?
Yeah, it's funny because a lot of people make those comparisons between the 80s and now. And yeah, in the 80s, it was kind of a grim time for agriculture. Prices were low. I think there was a lot of interest in expanding exports because they needed new drivers of demand, just as farmers always do, because they're good at what they do at producing more grain. So they needed new drivers of demand, and the international marketplace, was one area that was of strong interest back then. But again, the climate was not very, very, very bright. One thing that was sort of interesting when I first started working for the council was that's when we first started working with China. U.S.-China relationships first started to open up. And actually, I worked on one of the first Chinese delegations, agricultural delegations, to come to the United States. Vice Minister of Commerce came here. It was a big deal. And that was really the first time that we started working in China. The council was working in China. We started our office there in 1982. So when I came in 83, we were just getting going on a feed mill, joint premixed feed mill project in China. And so things were really starting to move in that direction, clearly more to the Asian direction in general and China specifically. But again, the mood was pretty grim with our members, and they were always looking for what's happening in the global marketplace that's going to make a difference for me, like right now, not 10 years from now.
Mm-hmm. Now you mentioned China, but then also you spent some time with the former USSR, doing some time there. So what did that teach you during your time about the effects of global politics and U.S. agriculture?
Watch your back, number one. No, it was a wild time back there. That was the Gorbachev years when Gorbachev was in power. And so there was change in the air in the Soviet Union. You could sense it every time you were going there. Soviet Union at that time became the number one market for U.S. corn. I always make the corollary between I was working that market and it became the number one market, but that's probably more of a coincidence than anything else. But seriously, it was a time where the market was really expanding and expanding fast because the Soviets had decided they were going to import grain to sort of stabilize meat supplies and feed supplies within the country. And so it was a very, very dynamic time, both for market growth and political change. And you were right smack in the middle of it. And it was very, very, thrilling. It was wild. Unexpected things kept happening. And so, one day I went to sleep in Lithuania, and the next morning I got up and all the signs had changed. All the road signs had changed. Things like that. And so there's, every time you went there, I was there practically about 2 to 3 weeks out of every month. Everything was always changing. Very dynamic atmosphere, and it was a really great time for U.S. exports to that part of the world.
Mm-hmm. So let's talk market development then. What do you think is necessary to set up like a new export market for U.S. corn now versus back in like the 1980s? Is it still just like relationship building, or are there other factors that are into it as well?
Yeah. Well, I'm a firm believer of being there. I always tell my sons the world belongs to those who show up. The sort of thing is that, doing good market intelligence, looking where those markets are going to be in the future, getting out there, visiting those marketplaces, having a presence in those markets. The same is true back then as it is now. You need to be starting to work those partnerships. People like to do business with people they know. That's true around the world. And so the fact that we're out there working those markets, having people in place, in tune with what's happening in those markets on a daily basis, so that we can adjust policies and programs, to sort of help move that engine of trade along. Very, very important. Now we're doing the same sort of thing now, particularly in the ethanol sphere, where again, a lot of our activity is turning over rocks, and I've always believed that. I've done a lot of that myself in my own career, turning over rocks and seeing where the opportunities lie. So incredibly important, and even more so today.
Do you have a favorite story or project that you worked on when you were turning over those rocks that you can share about?
Wow. There's a lot of them. You kind of have trouble sorting them all out. I think, probably one of my more favorite ones is, I guess, some of the work that we were doing in, I guess it was Poland. I'll use that as an example. There's so many of them flying through my mind right now. But in Poland, we were working very hard to introduce sorghum, of all things, into Poland, because we had, good exportable supplies of sorghum, and the Poles were sort of really convinced that we were trying to, do something. The U.S. was trying to do something untoward by trying to force this sorghum down their throats. And so it was an idea of, sitting down with them and say, no, we're here about looking at your options to have an efficient feed industry, an efficient livestock production industry. And, we're not saying buy this, buy that, buy whatever. We're saying look at the options, look what the U.S. has to offer. Corn, sorghum, barley at the time. And, they really jumped onto that, and they really became to trust both me and what we were trying to do. We were trying to work with them, not trying to just sell them something that they at one point perceived that they didn't want. So that was a really, it felt good after we got across that bridge there. So.
Okay. So for someone who has traveled quite a bit, is there a specific place in the world that is your favorite travel destination, or where would you like to go if you could go on the next vacation?
Well, for me, I've been doing this for, about 30 years. The place I want to go to is home. I say that, not so much tongue in cheek, because, after a while, home feels pretty good. But seriously, I've always enjoyed working in Mexico, partially because the language barrier isn't so great for me there, but partially because it's very rewarding. I think we can find new pockets of demand almost everywhere we go. We have people who really want to work with us. We don't really have any, until recently, we don't really have any strong trade policy problems with Mexico. Again, we're seen as partners in progress. I always really enjoyed there. Southeast Asia always has a warm spot in my heart. Again, same sort of thing. people really interested in working with us, and you see infant demand growing. When you see that sort of thing happening, that spark of demand starting to grow, like in a place like Vietnam, or like in a place like even Myanmar, it really starts to get those juices flowing. And the same thing is really true for the work that we've been doing in sub-Saharan Africa, where you see those initial stages of market development just trying to prove certain things like quality feed leads to quality products, and you see those lights come on in people's eyes, and people do really well with their enterprises because of some of the things that you introduce. That's really rewarding stuff. And so, those are 3 areas, but I really don't have any favorites. Home looks pretty good right about now.
Okay, awesome. With your time traveling, you mentioned language barriers have could be an issue traveling around. Do you have any funny stories of culture confusion as you're traveling to and from places that you'd like to share?
Yeah, well, a lot of them. A lot of them I probably shouldn't share. One I'm most proud of is that when I was working in the Soviet Union, I didn't know Russian when I first moved there, but I had a tutor and I was studying really hard because I would go to meetings and you'd sit there and they'd have their conversations off to the side. This is during the evil empire years, right? Where relationships weren't all that friendly. They would have their conversations to the side and that sort of thing, and all in Russian, and I was sitting there, not really saying much. So I studied really hard, and then I went back another trip, and I felt confident enough, and I answered a question before they translated it to me. And they go, "How long have you known Russian?" That sort of thing. That was a really enjoyable thing. Yeah, sure. There's a lot of funny stories. Just sort of cultural clash. I always remind Americans, be American. Don't try to be out Asian and the Asians. People accept, that you're not going to do things perfectly, and yes, you make some mistakes here and there, but I'm making an effort to communicate with them and understand their cultures has always been the best thing, and some of these stories end up being kind of funny ones you talk about after you get back.
So you announced that you are going to be retiring soon, and you'll be heading home. And in your retirement announcement, there was a quote that said, "I have done what I intended to accomplish, and as I move forward to this new phase of my own life, I am confident the organization is headed in the right direction." So can you share with us maybe what was it that you intended to accomplish here with Grain Council?
Sure, Hannah. When I became CEO, it was a bit of a controversial time for the council. People were kind of wondering what direction we were going in. There were some staff turnover at the time, and some uncertainty with our supporters. And what I really wanted to do, I started working in the council in 1983, so I felt very strongly in the mission of the council. It was part of my soul, part of my upbringing. It sounds kind of a little bit corny, but it is. I really believe in the mission of the council, and I really believed in the good that the council was doing. So I wanted to, again, calm the waters for the council, reestablish the support with all of our supporters. The checkoff states that help us so incredibly well, the Foreign Agricultural Service, our partners in agribusiness, our partners around the world. I wanted to calm the waters and get things moving in a positive direction again, like I knew they would, and then build us into a position where now we're in a position of strength. The council is really enjoying great support from our membership. Our funding from the Foreign Agricultural Service has increased. We just have the Agricultural Trade Program funding, the ATP funding coming in. So the council has good resources to work with. We have a solid challenge ahead of us in building new markets, and we've added the ethanol agenda. All these things. I wanted to get us moving in, calm the waters, get moving forward, then build back up again. That's what we've done. And so I feel really good about that, where we're headed and the future for the council. And the future for agricultural trade and exports, which again is sometimes a little kind of a crazy question these days, but I feel very strongly that particularly in the feed grain sector, we are headed in the right direction right now.
Mm-hmm. So throughout your career, starting all the way back from life on the farm to now, the agriculture industry is all about feeding the world, and one of my favorite parts is the people you meet along the way. So from that time span, has there been one person or many people who have been kind of like a mentor to you throughout your agriculture industry?
Yeah, there's a lot of them. A lot of them were former directors that I grew up with in the early stages of the council. I remember people like Antonio Rius, he was our director in Spain, taught me a lot about how to be a professional, how to approach the market in a very professional yet almost lighthearted manner. Trying to don't take yourself too seriously, it's kind of thing, which has always been one of my mottos. Colin Campbell, he was a guy we worked with on a lot of technical programs around the world, particularly with the sheep industry. He taught me a lot about core market development, how to make connections with producers on a plane where, again, you're doing kind of a help each other type of mode, win-win type of situation. People like CM Lin, our former director in Taiwan, who taught me a lot about grace in the marketplace, particularly in situations that may be tense, even tense political situations, tense market situations. He taught me a lot about the grace that's required to have those type of connections around the world. Those are the people in particular I remember very well, but there's been so many others. But in terms of mentors, I always look to those three. Some of them may have taught me some bad habits along the way, but they're all wonderful people, and I appreciate them very much even to this day.
Mm-hmm. Now, before we wrap up, there's one question I'd like to ask that my coworker Spencer has started with all of the other Meet the Farm Hand videos, and so I'd like to continue it on. But if you could go back to day one, young Tom starting at Grain Council, knowing what you know now, what advice would you tell yourself on the first day?
Hang in there. Things have a way of working out. The market does change, and be ready for those changes and anticipate those changes and not be fearful of them. Again, we were really worried back then when I first started. The farm economy is not good. Is there ever going to be a way out of this? Then, a few years later, we were prancing around the hallways, literally prancing around the hallways when China turned and bought their first grain from the United States. So, I just hang in there. Things do work out if you just stick with it and stay dedicated to what your goals are in life. And I always did that. I always tell people, the younger folks that I work with, be careful what you dream for, because if you stay focused on those dreams, they can really come true. And that's what I would tell myself back then. Hang in there, things will get better. And they always seem to do that and work themselves out.
Mm-hmm. Well, Tom Sleight with the U.S. Grain Council, thanks for joining us.
Well, thanks so much. Appreciate the opportunity.